Hello and welcome. And my name is Shannon Kemp, and I'm the Chief Digital Officer at DataVersity. We would like to thank you for joining today's DataVersity webinar, Data Management Best Practices. It is the latest installment in a monthly series called Data Ed Online with Dr. Peter Aiken. Just a couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. For questions, we will be collecting them via the Q&A section. And if you'd like to chat with us or with each other, we certainly encourage you to do so. Just for those, and to find the Q&A panel or the chat panel, you can find those icons in the bottom middle of your screen for those features or in the top toolbar. And to answer the most commonly asked questions, as always, we will send a follow-up email to all registrants within 2 business days containing links to the slides. And yes, we are recording and will likewise send a link of the recording to this session, as well as any additional information requested throughout the webinar. Now, let me introduce to you our speaker for today, Dr. Peter Aiken. Peter is an acknowledged data management authority, an associate professor at Virginia Commonwealth University, president of DAMA International, and associate director of the MIT International Society of Chief Data Officers. For more than 35 years, Peter has learned from working with hundreds of data management practices in 30 countries, including some of the world's most important. Among his 13 books are many firsts. Starting before Google, before data was big, and before data science, Peter has found several organizations that have helped more than 200 organizations leverage data-specific savings, which have been measured at more than 1.5 billion US dollars. His latest is Anything Awesome. And with that, let me turn everything over to Peter to get today's webinar started. Peter, hello and welcome.
And welcome to you, Shannon. It's so good to talk to everybody. Let's see, it's afternoon here on the East Coast in the U.S. and middle of a leftovers of a snowstorm, I suppose. But that's not what you're here to talk about today. It's titled Data Management Best Practices, where you could rearrange the words a little bit and say really practicing data management better. And that's kind of important because really it is a practice, and the more you practice, the better you will be at it. And it says that there's skills that you can learn around those areas. We're going to talk about the evolution from sort of 2 basic parts that came together to leave what we have today as the data management set of practices in order to do that. But before we get started in that, I'm going to do a little quick piece. I like to pretend that I gave Seth Meyers my business card. I don't know Seth, he doesn't know me, but I gave him my business card, which says something about it, of course, about data. And of course, he turned it into a joke. So here we go.
Business cards, really? We're still doing this? I hope your business is waste management because this is going right in the garbage. Giving someone a business card in 2021 is basically steampunk. Great. I'll give you a call when I need my cotton gin repaired. Thanks for the business card. It's a great way to be sure I'll remember you in 6 months when I'm cleaning out my wallet. Dinner receipt, dinner receipt. All right, this...
Call me if you ever need data solutions.
And what are those?
You'll have to call me to find out.
The only thing business cards are good for is to put in that fishbowl at the diner to see if you can win a free Reuben. Hey, business cards, get bent, you burn.
Not everybody does understand data as a practice discipline, but there are things about data that we can say, which is the data volume is certainly increasing much faster than we can process it. And the data interchange and overhead practices measurably sap organizational and individual productivity. And that reliance on existing technology-based approaches has not materially addressed this gap over time. And of course, we've got to worry about the surveillance capital industry as well, which is a defense role that we all have to play on this. So let's talk about why this has been. And it has been because data has been understood to be complex and detailed, and generally people who are outside of our profession don't really want to talk about it a lot. Most are really underqualified, particularly with respect to architecture and engineering skills. And the reason for this is because it's taught inconsistently across. It's much easier to focus on technology, as many organizations and programs do, and leave the business impact completely out of entire classifications of programs around this. And as a result, data practices are not well understood, and the lack of practices leads to some unknown dependencies. And more importantly than that, I want you to think about everybody in your organization that's a knowledge worker. they have all had to learn about data in one form or another. And I like to show what happens when you don't do that in a controlled and focused way. And this is guidance that was given to this gentleman here, Wally Easton, who's a wonderful entertainer. And I've got the YouTube link there for you. But he was simply told to go learn how to play the piano, so he did. And certainly Wally is excellent at what he does, in this case, entertaining auditoriums full of people. But if you wanted him to play at your wedding, for example, it might not be the best, or at least the most solemn occasion that you'd put together. And my point here is that our organizations are allowing our knowledge workers to invent really interesting, new and creative ways of doing this, but in an uncontrolled and unrepeatable fashion. And that doesn't generally produce the kind of results that we'd like people to be able to get out of it. And as a result, there's increasing amounts of what we call data debt that is piling up. Think of it as virtual hoarding, and certainly that's the case. But slowing progress, decreasing quality, increasing costs, and presenting greater risks is the natural result of having too much of anything. And the supply and demand lines are way out of kilter here as well. You can see in spite of the fact that this is really good academic business, we aren't producing nearly the amount that needs to occur. There's actually some numbers under here. The amount that nearly needs to occur here, though, so that you end up with this gap between private demand and supply in terms of the ability to do the work that needs to be done. I had a group come to me at one point, and they were disappointed because they had a general articulation of strategy, and they said it only shows up in one place here on our strategy. And that was true. The word data only showed up one place on this map. But I want you to imagine, to take the one at the far right, second row, implement digital people management system. There's going to be some sort of numbers of people that you're going to be implementing for. That's going to be data. There's going to be levels of satisfaction with it. There's going to be uh, uh, quality aspects of it. It won't do any good if the data gets all crossed on the inside. And I could go on and on. But of course, the answer is that each one of these strategic objectives, somebody's going to get hired or fired based on whether they make their, I'm oversimplifying here, of course, but based on whether they make their numbers, whether they have in fact implemented sufficient digital people management system in order to achieve the raise that they've been promised on this. And each of them has measures that you can go after and turn into data and figure out and show them how data can be an important part of this. But unfortunately, we're having to do this in a reactive mode rather than proactive mode. If we could switch it to proactive, we would understand, again, not just the faster, better, cheaper, and less risky, but also the impact upstream and downstream in both senses. We can fix things upstream, and we can make things better downstream, and help people to understand the specifics of all of this. And finally, look at the aspect of bringing AI into these concepts here, because AI has some incredible potential. There's some talks I'll be doing over this uh, season on AI and around that. Um, so first of all, most people don't have the name Augusta Ada King come to mind when I ask who is the founder of our discipline, but I count her as one of the most influential. She looked at this weaving loom here, and you guys all see how a weaving loom works. We've got different colored threads, and we're going to pass some other threads through the middle of them, and this is going to result in certain patterns, and we can make these patterns pictures, and that can become valuable, more valuable than the plain version of it, for example. She was actually looking at this thing called a jacquard loom, and if you look at the right-hand side of that photograph, you'll see that it looks very much like a computer card that I've shown right here next to it as well. And yes, if you should see the correlation there, because that's exactly what one evolved into the other on this. But she, looking only at the jacquard loom on the left-hand side of this, said, when my friend makes a machine that can process these things, I'll be able to take that machine and make it do math. And this is the world's first computer program written by Augusta Ada King. And she is absolutely the founder of our discipline, but she also gets credit for something else, or should get credit for it. And that is something that Gartner calls the hype cycle. She wrote in her works, in considering any new subject, there is frequently a tendency to first overrate what we find to be already interesting and remarkable, and secondly, by a sort of natural reaction to undervalue the true state of the case. In other words, oh, it's really great, or oh, it really sucks, right? The answer, of course, is somewhere in the middle. And our journey to find out where that middle ground is what they call the slope of enlightenment, leading all the way to the plateau of productivity on this. And of course, what it really means is this is all of us trying to figure this stuff out collectively. Some have the ability to do it better than others. But let's take a look and see where data management has been on a recent set of journeys here. I put a couple things out here. Data mesh has been considered a problem. Not that I have any personal opinion, but I do know that it's hard to go uphill when uh, Gartner puts an X through your piece. Data fabric over here on the headed for the trial of disillusionment, master data and data lakes, sort of interesting pieces. Looks like we're maturing in those areas and we're starting to make them into useful as they venture their way up the journal of plateau of productivity. Again, mesh approaching the top, the peak of inflated expectations, data fabric still falling with a longer-ish time frame on it. Again, better still with master data management and data lakes. So this is great. Something about vector database is interesting there. I'll pop that one over because when we look here, you can see they've almost finished their peak. This is 2024 that we're up to at this point to get these, and they're about ready to pop over. Data mesh again, fabric. You can see here these things are evolving in a way that makes sense to look at from all of these different perspectives. Each time you look at these things, it gives you an idea of when you should be investing in it, or who should be investing in it, or what types of things you should be believing about it. Something that is less mature will probably have less written and less firsthand experience, given that entire process around that. So let's take a look and see, there's our data fabric, data ops all in together. Let's take a look at what we're going to look at for the rest of the 45 minutes that we've got together. First of all, motivation, I'm starting to get into that. We're not making progress. So how do we get here? Building on proven research. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people that come up with really good ideas, but when you can repeat the practices around this, it helps out a whole lot. And so I'll tell you that quick story on that. And the industry's push for best practices that are out there. There's something called the data maturity model. I'll introduce you to that half. That's the other half of the concept, the data management body of knowledge. And the key, of course, is to put them both together because the entire process of your data management practices can be governed by the weakest link in the chain, and that's unfortunate. So how do you avoid that, and how do you know what to focus on? Strategy is the answer to that, which is also dependent on a three-legged stool. And then, of course, how does one get to Carnegie Hall? We'll answer that question as far as where to next. So let's dive in and take a look around here. The measures of unproductivity. Knowledge workers' stress is incredible. 33% of their time is spent reworking knowledge that already exists, 10% of their time creating new knowledge. It's not very rewarding. 53 and 52% would rather do household chores or pay bills than use their content management or their repositories. 74% report feeling overwhelmed or unhappy when working with data, and 33% of overwhelmed employees spend at least 1 hour per week procrastinating on data-related tasks. So there's some targets that you can shoot at almost immediately. 14% of everybody says they have a good understanding of how to use good business data. 21% of the 16 to 24-year-olds. And this just leads us to the conclusion that most of our employees are underprepared for the data-driven workforce, much less an AI component of it as well. Business decision makers, though, and even worse, 24% of them feel fully confident in their ability to read, work with, analyze, argue with that data. 1 in 3 are able to create measurable value. 1 in 4 say their analytics projections produce actionable insights, and 80% of them under the table would give me $100 to make them smarter about data. And again, I say this jokingly, let's just bring our hands above the table and I'll do it collectively, right? But this is a fairly large amount. When asked to incorporate data into things, too many organizations just put data in the hands of the employees and expect them to do better with it. They need to do more. The reason for that is very simple. I apologize for the slide mishap here, but the first question is, if you were going to make a data-driven decision in here, what would you do? And 52% of them would incorporate data, but 48% of them would defer to their gut, which is scary. And it's even scarier still when you go to the C level, where 1/3 of them would incorporate the data and 2/3 of them would defer to their gut. And when asked to incorporate these data pieces in here, 14% would avoid the task entirely. 36% would find an alternate method, whatever that is. Again, just incredible. By the way, the citations for these stats come from something called the Data Literacy Project, which is a wonderful source of research about how far we have to go in terms of educating people around this. Get to another one as well. This is Randy Bean's ongoing survey, like decades long, where he's looked, and in 2003, we saw some pretty good numbers. The first time any of these numbers had passed more than 50%. This is self-reporting, so we've got to take it with a skeptical piece, but he's been extremely consistent about the sample's size and quality over the years, and these are great. So we go into 2024 numbers, they went pretty high. There was a lot of optimism around that time, and I predicted we'd pull back a little bit from it. And sure enough, in 2025, the numbers did pull back slightly in terms of being able to say, where did these pieces come from? There we go, 37, 35% down the road. The most important thing from all of his surveys, as far as I'm concerned, is that he's also asked them the question year after year after year, are your questions, excuse me, yeah, are your questions, your challenges that you have around data primarily technology oriented, or are they primarily people and process oriented? And in 2018, the answer was a clear 80-20, as it was in 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, 2025. Clearly, 80% of the challenges that are data related are focused on people and process aspects of it. And data governance is the only resource that is designed to address these challenges. So these are some good things that you can toss back into your management, because they're going to be asking questions at this point. Why aren't my data problems solved? And we built the data warehouse, invested in technology, hired a chief data officer, purchased Salesforce, moved to the, like, these do not address people and process challenges. And of course, we've got some additional financial pushback as well, which is that the number one complaint on the hands of most CEOs is the size of their cloud bill. And this is crazy, because it shouldn't ever come to the CEOs. It should be something that the CTO, the CXO level manages, rather than the CEO. But remember, it was all sold as free. So let's just do a couple rules about this and why this is a problem. The key data in the cloud should have three attributes. The data outside the cloud, you call it warehouse as well, as the same principle, should have, and that is that it should be cleaner inside the warehouse or the cloud, should be smaller in volume, and it should be more shareable. That is the purpose of it. What unfortunately happens is that many times organizations will come in, and rather than think about it, they'll forklift the data, all their data, into the cloud. And the problem is there's no basis for making those decisions, no inclusion of engineering and architecture concepts, no idea that these concepts are missing. And again, 80% of your data out there is redundant, obsolete, or trivial. So how should it be done? Well, of course, the answer is to look at this as an inflection point, and you can take the data and transform it. It's either in or it's not. And in, again, should be less in volume. It should be cleaner in just general hygiene, and more shareable data. Because once you do this, you can start to do things like data branding, which gives you a really nice opportunity to take this beyond the mountains of just the data or the IT community, but bring it into the business community. They do appreciate that aspect of it in order to do this. But the challenge is, you can't get too detailed with your communication externally, because what happens when you try to go too much external competition, so you're going to say, well, we've got a bunch of data things that are going on. I want to tell you about the data team and the governors, and oh, we've got some stewards here. You know what they hear? They don't appreciate that. So just keep it at the programmatic level and say it's a part of the program as we're moving through it. So let's talk about how we got here. We're not really making progress, but we've got awareness, which is good. The most frequent question we used to get at Data Blueprint all the time was, how do we move our data management program to the next level? We made a question that you'd go back to say, well, what level are you currently at? Because you're certainly currently managing your data, but if you can't measure it, how do you manage it effectively? Where do you know to put time, money, and energy in so that the management activities that you undertake the best support of data for the organizational mission. So this all starts out when I had the title U.S. Department of Defense Reverse Engineering Program Manager in the late 80s, early 90s at the Defense Department. We sponsored research at Carnegie Mellon University's Software Engineering Institute, asking the question, how can we measure the performance of DoD and our partners? We really were looking to be able to rate good versus bad. I know that sounds strange, but you got to start someplace. We were also told to go check out and see what the Navy was up to. They were doing enterprise architecture, so I got to meet Clive Finkelstein and John Zachman, and as you know, the rest is amazing set of history there. The SEI responded with an integrated process and data improvement approach, but DoD required them actually to remove the data piece. And I was up there one afternoon and somebody said, "Hey, DoD didn't want this. You guys want it?" So they passed it on to me, and it grew into the CMMI as well as aspects of the DMBoK. The first one that we wrote up was with my friend and departed colleague Bert Parker, who really spearheaded this as an internal and development research project with the MITRE Corporation, working in key practice areas and trying to figure out what the normative models were, what we could do to scope out all of these pieces. These were generally reported as not well done. So again, you can certainly go look that up. Another person who isn't with us anymore, but was instrumental in this was Melanie Mecca, where she took the translation, the original pieces that were the bare bones piece done by Carnegie Mellon, and put them into a workable piece. And that's what we're going to talk about for just a few minutes here. The workable piece was published in 2014 as the data management maturity model. I was looking on Amazon the other day and didn't see any copies of it. So I hope it's I know they did make a PDF file, so there should be some aspects of that going around. They put a lot of time and effort into it. This was literally her baby in order to do this. Most practical value were these very great amount of detail that was put into here to back up what needed to go on and enable people to do this. So again, I would encourage you, if this is really an interest, each chapter ends up looking at very methodical purpose notes, follows the same template all the way through. You can go directly to the information that you need to have, and you can find out what is required for compliance, which is super, super useful. And the model was important because it emphasizes behavior, and it says that the activities result in the work products. So the behavior producing those activities is as crucial and as valuable in order to do this. Kind of again to making sure that everybody's rowing in the same direction. And when you go back and look at the improvements that are due to the method, I know that gets a little bit meta, but is what works, right? Is what comes up to it. CMMI has outperformed in general most of the other types of practices, being able to show around these things. And this is certainly something that can be built upon. In fact, I like to say it when I'm working with clients, that other improvement efforts, all of them always begin with an obligatory assessment phase. Again, the only ones that are proven to benefit and have literally decades of practice in benchmarking data is this method. All the others are made up, and they risk not meaningfully being able to compare your results against other organizations and adopt what we call unproven methods. So just a word of warning in there. I've had the privilege of being involved in creating two pieces of federal legislation. I say creating, that means they asked my opinion on it, not that I had anything to do with the process, but it's still nice to be asked. The first one was the one that created CIOs. The second one was this one, the Foundations of the Evidence-Based Practice Policymaking Act, which has the Open Data Governance Act. So you'll hear it referred to in a lot of ways. And if you're really good about reading, you can read it on the left there. I'm kidding, of course. What it did require, though, was the use of open data and open models where you're doing policy type talks. So there couldn't be any more of this proprietary sense that goes into it. And that all federal data is open now by default, which is a very big, big change for our colleagues in the federal government in here. Non-CDOs are required, non-political CDOs are required. They can't be part of the presidential appointments type of process. It's that they've got to be a professional class. And this mandates then best practices that are used, and they're a glossary, minimally a term bank inventory somehow of what's available in the way of resources. And like like I said, work by a professional class. And the penalties for this are higher than HIPAA. That usually gets people's attention right there. Higher than HIPAA. Oh my God, what's going on? Right? Because HIPAA's got jail terms associated with it. Indeed, it does. Well, our old original processes got started out in these kinds of old books where people would take time and energy and put them together, and the market for them, quite frankly, was not nearly as strong as it is today. But the DMBoK body was put out. We put out the second edition in 2017 and then updated it to revise just last year, where we've got a sort of in-stream revision on this. The focus around all of these is the practice areas. These are the areas that organizations need to start practicing in order to do this. There are 11 of them in the current version of it, and we've got the version 3 work well underway at the moment. There's a section on the website if you need to catch up on what's going on there. We've been very good stuff in terms of looking at that. All right, well, now we've talked about DMBoK and we've talked about the data management model. Let's look at how they work together on this. And so first of all, I'll show you a picture. Now, this is not really the way my house looks today because it has about 2 inches of snow on top of everything, and the barn is fully built. You may ask, why in the heck am I showing you a picture of my barn? Well, I actually use these pictures because I needed to document something. And the thing I needed to document was that I was borrowing money from the bank to build this barn. And in order to do that, the bank would give me exactly this much money. And they said, before no more money comes to you until you pass a foundation inspection. Ooh, okay, great. Sounds like actually a very good business opportunity. Business foundation inspection. So what would that imply? Well, it would imply that you've got a good foundation, because if you know anything about horse people, and I'm what's called a horse husband, what this means is that my wife has a t-shirt that says, my husband asked me to choose between him and the horses. Gee, I sure do miss him. So that means that if the good barn was built on top of a poor foundation, the horses would be injured and the money would go to getting the horses to be whole rather than paying the bank back. And so again, you can see this makes good business sense. You will build a good foundation before you will build a good barn. We need to do the same things in our data world here. I'll show you this in a second, because there is no IT equivalent, unfortunately. So this also relates to Maslow. You may remember Maslow back from high school. There are some food, clothing, and shelter needs that if are unmet, we will never be safe. And if we're never safe, we'll never be part of something that is bigger than us, part of a family, part of a group. Then not being part of something else, we'll never know ourselves as separate or different from the group, and therefore we'll never get to self-actualization. So Maslow's insight was that all these things need to occur before we can self-actualize. That self-actualized term has been stolen. We were doing a version of this for the technologies that we're using. You can see everything up there is absolutely crazy in terms of uh, focused clearly on technology. Now, when we're going to go the next step down from it, we would actually look and say that's just the tip of the iceberg. And the same way as Maslow's needs are out there, we also need to have a good practices foundation in order to do data correctly. This means that these things at the top are technologies, and they can be learned and relearned, and they're relatively speaking let's say narrow in terms of what they are accomplishing here, whereas the foundational practices are just that. They are broadly focused, just as the foundation is going to support my entire barn. I hope for 30 years from this point on, the data foundation practices, they represent a set of organizational capabilities. And interestingly, what does happen is that in spite of me explaining this a lot, people will often come back and say, I got that, Peter, but still, can you go faster? And the answer is, well, yes, I could. If I go faster, it will take longer. If I go faster, it will cost more. If I go faster, it will deliver less. If I go faster, it will present greater risk. Yes, organizationally, we need to be focusing in this area. Now, let's take what we've already learned about the general practices around the data management maturity piece. And let's, for the moment, say that there are 5 integrated practice areas that we're interested in becoming better at. Remember, there are 11 total, but we're just going to show 5 in this example for pretty picture purposes. We need data being able to be managed coherently. There needs to be a strategy to all of it. We can't just have everybody doing everything. We have a professional class that can now be counted upon to provide excellent service around these areas. We now understand more about data operations and data lifecycle management. Many of the work in Mesh and Fabric are coming in this general direction. Data quality has been with us and will continue to be with us, maintaining fit for purpose. And finally, we're going to have architectural components that go into it. So this is the one way of mapping out it. We're going to have some supporting practices. The point here, we can now rate each of these 5 areas according to whether they are at the initial, in other words, they have no background at all, they are managed, meaning that there exists some documentation versus they are defined. Again, something is actually written down about it. They are measured, because if we don't measure it, we don't know how well we're going to be doing it compared to the next time through, and therefore we can never achieve the process of optimization. This is the beauty of the CMMI Institute. Everybody else will tell you all sorts of things, but they were the ones that came up with this. And I'm now going to assign some values. So each of these data practices areas is now getting assigned the value of 3. They are defined. That means there exists some documentation. You can see the standards are not high, but they are objective standards. When you use the 400 plus behavior statements that I described earlier, it really does make a lot of good sense in it. The problem is, in this particular model, I'm just again looking at 5 of these, the data management strategy, for whatever reason, is poorly done. It's at initial maturity. It represents the weak link in the chain. And unfortunately, because there is no strategy, all the rest of these operations are less focused, less coherent than they would be, and maybe even still at level 3s, verging on incoherent in order to look at this. So this is what we mean in terms of looking at them. We can now take those sort of practice areas and look at them again, whether they're performed, managed, defined, measured, optimized, or say whatever they're rated. And we can also rate them for all organizations. There are many organizations that would have a reflection that would be somewhat like this. Again, this is completely representative, so please don't think anybody's trying to tell you something, but you're probably in an area that you can maybe informally guess this for yourself, and then use this diagram to start conversing with management about it. A more detailed survey might confirm or deny your results and give you, again, more detailed types of information that can fall out of it. Again, sample all the way around, looking at these things, saying what's going on relative to perhaps some benchmarks that are certainly available. You can get them in the research literature. And I would go, though, and say it's generally not worth a lot of investment to discover you're at the beginning of your journey. Use that energy to uncover previously unknown pockets of excellence, because I guarantee you have them around your organization, or your organization wouldn't be successful. So what we're trying to do is elevate the existing expertise in there. The then focus would be to say, what are they doing well? And can other parts of the organization learn from it? Again, I hope the answer is yes, because that allows you then to do something like what we did a long time ago. And we're focusing in on the insurance industry. So here you see a set of representative subsets. This was when we had a valid data sample that was relatively current, and we were able to pull some good data out of it. We haven't had any funding to go back and do more detailed looks, but perhaps somebody else will get inspired to carry this on. Here's another way to look at this. Was actually working with a group that was in a fairly non-competitive industry. There were sort of 2 dominant firms, and I was talking to one of them, and you can imagine the boredom in the room. Oh God, you're a 1 and a 1 and a 2 and a 2 and a 1. The hell is this guy droning on, right? And I said, well, then I showed them the competition. All of a sudden, I had their attention, because they assumed incorrectly that the only competition I could be talking about was the people they considered their competition in this. We can also, of course, with the same kinds of results, look at how the industry compares to the overall response. Again, some of it's interesting, some of it's not, probably major moves rather than minor moves in here. But clearly, if we're going to look and adhere still to the weak link in the chain, in order to get this organization up, we're going to have three areas of focus that need to go to a two in order to get all of the parts of the organization up to a two. I hope that's clear. If it's not, we'll certainly do questions at the end. I got just one more of these eye charts for you. This is a wonderful story where the folks at the World Bank had this published a while ago. So it's a really great story for them. And I know you don't usually use this sort of thing, but anyway, the Treasury Department asked us to do theirs, and they were at entry level, if you will, and so was the Information Systems Group. But the business components were actually doing world-class and standards-defining work within there. So again, these are good results that you can come up with and take a look again, significantly above the industry, as well as close to the overall industry benchmarks, with the exception of metadata and quality assurance in this particular set of measures. So again, fairly good. We've also not been able to do a real comparison of these for a long time, but the general first part of it was that the 13 years that passed between 2007 and 2019 show no real significant appreciation in the maturity of the practices. And similarly, we've actually been doing something called the National Association of Adult Liter, excuse me, National Assessment of Adult Literacy. And we've been surveying people for years in these areas and finding, interestingly, that oh, that's sorry, we had to change it too. That's right. But it's now called the PIAC, Program for International Assessment of Adult Competencies. But we stopped asking people questions in person during the pandemic, and so we aren't back on track with these things. So we have, unfortunately, old data, but once again, 2012-14 data to 2017 data showing no healthy appreciation. In fact, flat results all the way around. And that's a challenge because, of course, we are getting to a more and more data literate world looking in all of these areas. So what do we need? Well, we're going to shift our focus for just a second and dive down into strategy for just a quick look. The real key is that when a group of people are sitting around trying to get work done, a work group, by definition, strategy is what guides them. I spent 3 years at Walmart, a wonderful group of people to work with, and they were extraordinarily clear on their overarching strategy, which was everyday low price. They would laugh at you if you didn't understand that this was part of the ethos that went into every aspect of what Walmart was doing and guided decisions along those lines. Again, fantastic ability to be able to do this. Well, this leads us into an interesting book that I was told to read before my wife would have a conversation with me about business. She said, "You have to read The Goal." And I said, "What is The Goal?" And she said, "Read it and you'll find out." I did. Thanked her for it. It's sold lots more copies of this book than I've sold any of my own books. But if you aren't familiar with it, it really focuses in particularly on something called the theory of constraints. And it's a very simple way of engaging people in a focus for trying to do improvement in systems. So his articulation of it was that management systems are limited in achieving goals by a small number of constraints. And so if you can address a small number of constraints, you will have better success, faster, better, cheaper, less risky, right? Not all of them at the same time, of course. One constraint that allows you to identify that and make a noticeable constraint, just like with a recipe, you don't want to change everything at once. And so again, chain is no stronger than its weakest link becomes the focus of the entire book as people are trying to figure out how to go through this. So a wonderful, wonderful piece. The older I've gotten, the more all of these things kind of accrete to a common type of level. So the generic sense of this, and if you're going to do it. And I've got a version of my data strategy book that I think follows faithfully on it. You identify the constraint and you exploit that constraint. You try to fix it quickly. If it's not going to work quickly, then you've got to tell other things that they're just not as important and we need to fix this one first. If we don't fix the constraint, again, regardless of whatever happens, we're going to repeat the process because it's a never-ending process of finding the constraint. And the reason the goal is such a successful book is because it illustrates that, and many people practice this around there. There's lots of other components that go into it, but think of this as, again, from a data management perspective, something is not going as well with your data management. It's probably something that's going to prevent you from going from a 2 to a 3 in one particular area. So now you've got a very nice focus. What can you do to do this? Well, again, the strategy is going to be incredibly important in order to do that. Again, we're going to use a different strategy if we're on the left and the bad guys are on the right than we are if we're on the left at this position and the bad guys are down there than we are if the converse was true and the bad guys were up at the top and the good guys down here at the bottom. So, of course, each of these is going to call in for it. A wonderful quote one of our former presidents actually said, in preparing for battle, I've always found that plans are useless, but planning itself is indispensable. Again, I believe it was Mike Tyson said everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. So again, I like to kind of work us towards now. We've taken strategy and we've taken a method in here. What's really happening? Well, first of all, we're all trying to leverage high performance automation. If we don't understand that as a basic piece, there's not much point of going onwards. So what does that mean? Well, got various components of data literacy, data supply, uneven amounts of standardization that are being used in there. And generally, it'll all work better if we are able to get all the rough edges off it and make them smooth so that they will, in fact, work together in order to do this. But this isn't going to happen without investments in engineering and architecture. And interestingly, in all my travels I've done, I was on a tea farm on a holiday in India, and I saw the sign hanging over the cash register that said, "Quality engineering architecture work products do not happen accidentally." And I said to the gentleman who was behind "You have a Deming quote." And he said, "Ah, yes, Deming guides a lot of what we do here at my tea farm." So yes, again, well, we can extend that, of course, down into the data world as well and say that data engineering requires the same kind of an investment, because if we don't have that sort of an investment made, we're not going to be able to do a good job with the data. And again, we're not talking AI here yet, but you can extend any of this to AI easily and just say, look, these things have to be in place because your AI is not going to have the time built in to incorporate all that information. It's just not going to work. Again, lots and lots of aspects can happen here. Let's take a look at a way in which an organization might try to combine these types of things. One of the things, again, remembering that most things tend to occur in threes, and in the DMBoK as well, you probably don't want to concentrate on just one, but you also don't want to take all 11 on at once. So maybe a project that is high on your strategy list might count data quality, governance, and data warehousing components that you're putting together. By the way, once again, I mentioned before, blurred before, uh, warehousing and cloud. I do see them as highly overlapping because they're really providing a capability more than anything else. And with the focus being on cloud bills, it may make sense to take a look at your cloud maneuver with the discipline I'm going to show you right now and see if the outcome would have been different, perhaps less focus on there. Again, we can take some questions at the end if people are interested in finding more, but the idea here is to say, yeah, we're not going to get anywhere with just one wedge, but taking maybe these three wedges, quality, governance, and warehouse, and putting them together. I'm also going to give everybody one cycle's worth of, maybe it's a plus instead of a times, but all right, so you've been through a cycle one time. You've done some work. You get one experience point, maybe we'll say it that way. So what would version 2 might look like? Well, you may discover that really you need to put some time and attention into metadata metadata while continuing your data governance and data warehousing efforts. And that discipline of putting the two of them together might actually work. Well, you'll notice again, the governance and warehousing have two X points, whereas the metadata only has one, as does the data quality one as well. If we go to version 3, again, we might discover that there's a category that might even benefit us further, which is reference and master data within that. Looking at how that works, notice we've gotten to 3 points on that, and we've gotten some other points in other areas. Managed well, the organization can find out what types of skills it's going to need by mapping the same way in order to into that. Again, what's next for these things? Well, quite a bit, and at the same time, we're the same. So let's dive a little bit further in there. Again, where do you go? There are going to be a bunch of things that are going to further your organizational strategy. Your organizational strategy will have laid them out for you. There are also a bunch of data that is used by the business, and that's great to have. So now I've got the intersection between the two of those. That looks like a good place to go off and try to find them. But there's one more slice we can make, and that maybe, like I said, you were learning using the DMBoK to kind of manage your skills. And the three places in the center there, that's really your sweet spot. If you can find that, you've got a win-win-win situation where most organizations are going to be able to actually have something that enables them to go and get specific pieces focused on. I some organizations that I talk to are unsure about what's the next thing they should do because they haven't got a good strategy or they don't understand their organizational strategy in order to focus on that. And this leads us back to where we started off, which is not necessarily Carnegie Hall, but you do need to have, of course, yeah, there's the old joke, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. But it's also making sure that if we think of the data as the music, that's a good way to do it. If there was a song that I hated more than anything else in the year that I graduated high school in 1977, it was the song "Staying Alive" by the Bee Gees. And again, that, but practice, practice, practice actually showed me, I was really quite thankful. Bruce Springsteen playing that song, you can Google it, find it on YouTube. It's a wonderful set. He was wanting to do something nice for the Australians because he was flying his band over and they were going to do a tour. And he said, let's do Staying Alive. And I heard this story from somebody. They supposedly rehearsed it on the plane there. And like I said, I still have a t-shirt that says disco sucks. All right. That's how much I hated disco back in the days. Why am I telling you this? Well, again, the data is one part of it, but you've got to have your people that understand what they're doing with respect to this. First of all, your data management group. Second of all, your IT group understanding this. And then thirdly, your business group. Sometimes better to go to the business rather than IT. But there's lots and lots and lots that needs to be learned as organizations are trying to do beta. And the challenge has been that we just don't offer this in most college and university craft. There are a couple of spots around the country that do teach more of this, but this isn't even really covered in most chief data officer programs at this point in time. And yet, of course, you know, garbage in, garbage out is one of the major problems that organizations have with this. The other problem, if you recall back at the very beginning, what we're saying here is that these are people and process problems. That means you need to start looking at change management. And luckily, it's a well-matured discipline. There are experts and there is expertise out there that you can get to show people how to change things. And that's incredibly important because if you don't, it won't work that way. I'm going to harp on this for just a minute, but the idea that most organizations just simply put things in and people adopt them doesn't work. I can remember Mike Hammer telling a story that a bank executive that he had that was trying to figure things out said, well, I told everybody to read it and they all signed a piece of paper that said they read it. And he said, yep. And who counted the pieces of paper to make sure that they were all there? And the guy said, oh, we don't need to do that. And Mike said, great. Well, I'm just going to call one of your tellers and ask her if she can relate the strategy to us and put it on the speakerphone, of course. And it was a royally embarrassing situation. Again, people have to know what their roles are. And that's why it's so important to do this. In addition to just change management, change management is absolutely crucial in order to do this. It's also really important to make sure that you've got the right things in place. And the animation that keeps playing over and over again for those of you that are younger is an analog, how an analog key worked. And you can see that the key is inserted in the lock. And when the pins are at the right level, the lock will open, and if not, the lock won't. So this is how you make a physical analog lock. I know we're going to have to explain both to the young people of the world, but that's what happened. Well, these are the key, and this is Barbara Lippert published this in 1987. She said, "When I see vision, skills, incentive, action plan, but I see frustration, I know that they're missing resources. And I also, when I see vision, incentive, resources, and an action plan, and I see anxiety, I know they haven't got the skills. And when I see skills, incentive, resources, and an action plan, I see confusion because they're missing the vision." Again, it's a very nice way of describing organizational readiness. It's the kind of readiness that is actually required in order to help organizations understand this, because the biggest barrier to data change is culture. And if we don't get the culture aspects of it right, none of the rest of this is going to work. Now, the the whole point is oh no, sorry, let me get to my summary slide. Oh, I'm sorry, I've got one more thing I got to tell you about, and then I'll go to the summary slide. Yeah, first of all, there's a case study on this. If you're interested, you can go out there. You don't even have to register for it. And again, we go back to sort of our four data truths. The data volume is increasing faster than we're able to process it. The overhead costs are measurably sapping organization and individual behaviors, and that leads to productivity decreases as well. Reliance on the existing technology base has not materially addressed these pieces. And finally, of course, surveillance capital industry is always going to be focusing in on this. What does this mean? Well, we're in an area where we need to have a paradigm shift, and we need to have an understanding that process is going to be more important than results, first of all, because this is data management is something that produces results when you have reached a critical mass. But if you haven't got the critical mass, you're not going to get the results. It's also, by the way, a great limiter of your project size, because if you cannot see what a good outcome is going to be and you can't forecast a good return on your investment, it's probably the case that you wouldn't. I saw some figures back in the last decade where organizations were spending $50,000 per employee to implement an ERP. Now, what I have yet to do is get anybody to show me what $50,000 worth of improvement actually looks like per employee in that sense. It just does not happen. It's better the organization itself learn. One of my favorite quotes from my new book is Kathy Doss, where she says, look, we know how to data better. What we don't know is how to do data better at your organization. And that's going to be true for anybody. You are the experts who best know what needs to happen, how you can make your data practices more useful so that you can link your data strategy directly to the organizational strategy and thus get yourself into that conversation that you need to be in. Because what we really want to do is get in front of the RFPs. But by the time an RFP is lit, it's too late and nobody thinks about it. The people and the process aspects of data management are not receiving enough attention. And again, very little in terms of what goes on in the classroom. Certainly, you're mainly having to turn to outlets like DATAVERSITY to find out what's actually going on in this. It's sort of a great puzzle because there are more than 1,000 of you out there, right? And finally, best practices do exist. There's lots of places that you can go to get that piece. Remember the two components of it here. I'll just go through the whole thing. we should not be satisfied with our current state. It is not great. Data management practices is an area that organizations have to do better with. It's the biggest source of untapped productivity. And the only thing you need to do to convince yourself is to remember that almost nobody received any data management training out there. And that they've all learned and invented their own ways, just like Wally Easton. And while that's good for creativity, it's probably not good for efficiency. So we remain unsatisfied with this current state and quite frankly are not making progress in this area when I go out and talk to organizations, when I go out and work with organizations, and I've worked with more than 1,000 in my careers. Uh, it's just not happening out there. There are some good areas, some really exemplary processes, but the gap is widening, and most people are not practicing at the high end in there. Uh, Understanding that DoD actually started off with this research, went to the Software Engineering Institute at Carnegie Mellon University, and from there to the MITRE Corporation as a research and development project, and from there to the spinoff from the Carnegie Mellon Institute in there. And the two pieces that are really being used to put together are the data management maturity model, the DMM. Again, just a generic way of evaluating how well you are doing your existing practices. There's lots and lots of description. There's a free article that I have that I'll include in the slides for this, so you guys can all get a copy of that. But there's lots and lots of areas. The other thing, of course, is our data management body of knowledge. Full disclosure, again, I am the president of DAMA, really proud of the data management body of knowledge and the volunteer efforts that have produced it so far in order to do this. And it is considered to be best practices now. And I contend that by doing both of them well, you don't just end up with one and one making three, but one and one making 11 in order to come up with that. It's just a way to go. I haven't found a better one. The only thing that oftentimes groups can use to subvert that is to go with a single data layer, single data platform, something like SAS or Databricks. And they find that keeping all the options fewer, but having it well understood is advantageous in many cases. And these organizations do really, really well, but they're not doing much about the overall data management piece. They're doing a couple things really well, and it's working well for their businesses. Key is, of course, to understand and apply both of these better, and to understand that the way to improve it is to identify the weak link in the architecture. Again, if we go back to the goal, the weak link one of the weak links in the architecture was that they had a machine that was a robot, and it was producing great quantities of something, but they had to store it and they weren't selling it. And so while it was nice they had these robots, they weren't actually contributing to the organizational strategy. They were the weak link at one point. We talked just a bit on strategy, but strategy is what has to guide your data management practices. What can we do with data management that will provide data so that the organization can use data to apply in its search for strategic objectives? That's the focus. If we have that as a focus, many things become easier. To realize, of course, that it is, as all things, a three-legged stool, people, process, and technology, but that most organizations are focusing on technology to the exclusion of the minimally 80% of the problem that is people and process. And what other part of your organization do you have that provides answers to people with people and process challenges? The answer is data governance, of course. And finally, how does one get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. The idea here is that we should be approaching this not as a one and done kind of situation, but as building a set of capabilities that the organization will need from this point on onwards. That we have a lot of good ideas for where things are going to go from here. But in general, it's going to be a relatively straightforward focus around this. A couple books that may be interesting for you guys to take a look at, and we have some upcoming new season. Whoops, where did my Shannon? I've gone 2 minutes early and I've forgotten where my next month's stuff is. I think we're on the 11th or so on January.
In fact, I was just looking at it. We are let me pull it up so I can confirm for sure. Uh, so we are looking at January 13th. Data
13th.
strategy
Okay,
and
there we go.
action. Yeah.
And again, this starts our 15th year. So we're super pleased to announce the start of the 15th year. And it's, as always, a pleasure to work with you, Shannon.
Likewise, 15 years. I can't believe it. It's just
Uh,
so
when
crazy.
when we first met, Shannon, you were shy about having your picture taken. Now we have all those wonderful things that show both of us aging gracefully. And those of you that
You
don't know,
wore me
Shannon and I are
down.
both musicians. Were you done? Actually, your dad did. He was really good at that.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. Yeah. And I always laugh, I'm always there right as soon as you ask the question, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. So true.
At least for musicians, it what works. Yes. All
Yeah.
right. Do we have a couple questions for us?
Me too. Just to answer the most commonly asked questions, just a reminder, I will send a follow-up email for this webinar by end of day Thursday with links to the slides and links to the recording. Lots of great questions coming in here, Peter. So do you have any thought on when measuring maturity or capability should we use evidence-based measurements or consensus? How do you decide where to measure in large organizations?
Sorry, I'm writing it down. It's a great question. Let me make sure everybody else understands. My counsel in the webinar was to not spend a lot of money finding out that you're not very good. And it just doesn't make a lot of sense. So the question was, should you use, under what circumstances should you be using evidence-based information to inform that rating and consensus-based? And quite frankly, the consensus-based can be done at one meeting, and you can come back and revisit it knowing that it's consensus-based. It's, can be like taking a temperature sort of a thing if organizations want to do it that way. I think they both have uses. I think that the evidence-based usually ends up too granular, or you need to make it lumpy and you can only do it, again, once every 5 years, once every 2 years, however often you're going to reassess. But the detailed data that comes out of evidence-based maturity would tell you specifically, again, you're way up on that maturity scale if you've got evidence-based in order to do that. But most organizations just aren't there. And so you're starting certainly with the consensus based and then working towards that. And quite frankly, you can say your consensus based is a straw consensus and that you're looking for ways of disproving it. And by all means, get involved, join the conversation, and help us figure it out from here. Good question. Thanks.
Absolutely. So great question. So speaking of measurements, how should my company measure baseline and ongoing data literacy?
Different topic, but there are some objective things that you can do to measure data literacy. What I did objectively was divide the population into young people with a device that connects them to high speed on the internet, and they are called mobile data spreaders. Then there are those that mobile data spreaders that have turned into adults, but are still running around spreading data as adult data spreaders. And then knowledge workers is that third level. And from that perspective, I have defined, I believe it's 8 or so specific objective characteristics at each level. I think that's the answer that you're looking for. The book is called Data Literacy. It's available on audible.com if you happen to like to listen to your books as well as read them. I'm not suggesting you should buy both, but uh, I wonder how that works. Let's see. I guess I would get paid twice if you bought both. Uh, it's been interesting, Shannon. In my household, we buy many, many books just because we both love books. But almost always, when we get the same book, we buy it in two different formats. So it's more expensive than less expensive.
I understand. I love listening to books, especially when I'm learning something as well while I'm reading it. I just found that I learn better.
And of course, you know who recorded my book, right?
Who recorded your book?
Oh goodness, now you the question. She works for you, the redhead. Um, I said
Susan.
Barbara, that's not right. Susan, yes, Susan did it. She's
Oh,
an
I did not know that.
award-winning West Coast. Yes, she did a great job.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, she is an
It's
award-winning audio
voice
speaker.
actress.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, that's awesome. Um, and there's a request to see the book list again.
Always happy to show the book list. Actually, do you still have the DATAVERSITY book
We
shop, Shannon?
don't. Yeah, no, we don't. We took that down a
In the
while
old
ago,
days,
but
Amazon would give you a few cents for every book that you sold through your bookstore. So it was advantageous to have several bookstores up and running. But they stopped that. They became very tight very quick.
yeah, we
All right.
yeah, it was a challenge to maintain. But
It is. It is. Why am I
yeah,
looking at the other?
but we should start a resource page again. I don't think that would be a bad thing. Um, I love it. All right. Let me just see if I can. All right. I think that is all the questions that we
Oh my
have.
goodness, we stumped them all.
I know. I'm just waiting. So if y'all have additional questions, feel free to oh, here we go. Do you think that AI will help with measuring maturity in the near future?
Interesting. Um, I haven't tried to ask AI to measure maturity, but measuring maturity is about demonstrating behavior in certain types of practices with respect to how you're managing data. And there's absolutely no reason why you couldn't have those pieces of evidence picked up. Again, we go back to the evidence versus the consensus-based approach, and use that evidence in direct or personally surrogate ways to represent the maturity of the organization in there. And that I think would be helpful. I haven't tried it yet. Uh, just a brief word on AI. It's going to be tremendously helpful to us as data management professionals because specifically it really takes us as knowledge workers and extends what we're doing. Um, I had a friend who I would bring into an organization, and he would take 6 weeks and walk around, and in 6 weeks he would have an absolutely perfect logical model of the organization that was super, super useful. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't complete, but it was by golly, at the end of 6 weeks, you had a really good product in there. And he did it over and over and over again. I don't know his mind just worked that way. But it's also important to remember that 6 weeks was about all you wanted to do. If you wanted him to work 12 weeks on it, you got into economies of scale right away, and it didn't work in that sense. So very, very much, absolutely keep it focused on the uh, things that are strategic in the organization, and you'll much be better. I'm tripping over word station. You'll be much better able to hang on to your job. I hate to say it that way, but it is unfortunate that AI is taking over things. And why do we need these data management anymore? And AI does understand, for example, I can take a data set and ask it whether the data set is normalized or not, and it will get much of the answer correct. Again, I rate it as about an 85, about 15% totally made up, just bull hockey. But the 85% that it does produce is really, really useful, and I use it all the time. Taking it back to the measurement, I think it would be a really interesting exercise. I don't know if anybody's tried it yet, but I can't see any reason it wouldn't work. Long answer on that. Hopefully that was useful, though.
Very useful. All right. I give you all just a moment. I don't see any additional questions, but Peter, what a wonderful year we've had. Thank you so much for another fantastic year of webinars.
Thank you, Shannon. I'm looking forward to next year. We'll have a fresh new look and some interesting AI topics that we're bringing for everybody as well.
Yeah, speaking of AI, yeah, we've got a hot lineup for y'all next year. And I put the link into the chat there for everyone. You can see the first webinar starting in January with Data Strategy and Action using AI to build a foundation for enterprise data governance success. So that'll be
In
a
fact, it's a
ton of fun.
really good example of what we were just talking about. We're going to
Exactly.
talk about how to use AI to help you focus in on that area.
I love it. It's perfect. All right, y'all. Well, thank you so much. Happy holidays to everybody. Happy New Year. And have a
Thanks
great
for taking
end
time
of
to be
year.
with us.
Yeah. Thanks, Peter.
Yeah. Cheers. Bye, Shannon.